of the Colorado State Board of Land Commissioners. Today is Wednesday, August 12th, 2020. Our meeting is being conducted via Zoom due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Let's see, our first item of business, our first item of business is open public comment for non-agenda items. And for participants, I believe in the past, you have the ability, you can raise a hand if you would like to address the commission. And again, this would be for any item that we are not going to be taking up in the agenda today. So if you would like to make a comment, please raise your hand and we'll be sure to bring you forward to address the commissioners.
Not seeing any, Commissioner.
Seeing none. Okay, we'll move along to announcements. Director Ryan, any?
Nothing beyond what's in the staff report, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. And we'll get to the staff report. Anything from our commissioners related to announcements or FYIs? Please, moving right along. I see Doug Vilsack is with us from the Department of Natural Resources. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll ask you for an update.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I've been listening in this morning, and always good to hear from Chico Basin and hear about water. I've taken that hat off a little bit at DNR, so always good to get a refresher.
Yeah.
So just kind of some background on the comings and goings at DNR these days. Obviously still very focused on COVID-19 and kind of maintaining the good track record we've had in terms of keeping our employees safe, and at the same time keeping state parks and wildlife areas and all of those places open. I was chatting with some folks with CPW yesterday, some sportsmen, and I think in terms of the state of Colorado, we're pretty proud of what we have been able to do over the past few months in terms of keeping our open spaces open when many people want to get outdoors. And so still kind of working to maintain that. Some of the states surrounding us and in the West have not fared as well in terms of keeping their public lands open and at the same time maintaining funding for public lands. So a lot of challenges around the country these days. In terms of just COVID numbers, I think everybody watches the news and has seen those. We have seen some good progress in the last few days, just in terms of where Colorado stands. We certainly were kind of on an upward trend for a while there in the middle of the summer, and have now seen our 7-day prevalence go back down again. So that's a good sign, and we'll see what happens as some schools begin to open here. Continuing to really watch COVID-19, those types of issues at our state parks. One of the big things we're kind of transitioning to on that front is less how do we close parks, how do we deal with social distancing, and more how do we deal with the recreation impacts that we're seeing. We've just seen huge increases in use across our properties, 30 or 40% more visitation in some of our parks in the spring and in the early summer. So we see increased revenue from that, but at the same time, we see increased costs, and with social distancing, increased kind of use of trails, people spreading out on trails. The Forest Service particularly, we've been meeting with all of our federal partners weekly, pretty much since the pandemic began. And the Forest Service, especially this summer, has just reported tremendous usage. So kind of like weekend usage on the weekdays, holiday usage on the weekends, and actual holidays just off the charts. And so really looking not only this fall, how we continue to educate folks about kind of responsible recreation, but how we think about that in the long term if we're going to see these trends continue and increasingly people getting into the outdoors. So a lot of challenging but good conversations around that. Of course, we're seeing more visitors and people moving to Colorado anyway, so these are things we really need to work on. Elsewhere at DNR on the legislative front, as we've talked about, we are continuing conversations with the governor's office about the shrinking trust issue that has come up here many times. I think every time I'm on a commission meeting. So we've kind of enlisted a few folks over there and are just trying to do kind of education now and just make sure that that's on the radar for potential action. So not too much to report in terms of progress, but really kind of working, and Bill will certainly be involved in those conversations over the next couple months. Elsewhere, CPW, again, as usual, quite a lot going on. I mentioned some of that. As was mentioned earlier, we have 3 new Parks and Wildlife commissioners. Great to see Commissioner Phillips. I think that's great representation from the State Land Board with everything we've had kind of going on over the past few years. Dallas May, also from out in the Eastern Plains from Lamar, has joined the commission, and then Jay Tushton, who also lives out on the Eastern Plains. So we have lots of new recruits from that part of the world these days, and we're looking forward to that. I would say with CPW, probably the most relevant thing for the State Land Board, we are continuing to have discussions around a regulation that was put in place in the spring about charging or basically requiring hunting and fishing licenses, or hunting or fishing licenses on our state wildlife areas. That was something that CPW had kind of worked on for quite some time, and we're getting all sorts of feedback from various stakeholder groups about the impact of that regulation. The intent is really, again, kind of what I talked about earlier, to recognize the fact that many of those state wildlife areas are paid for with hunting and fishing, or were paid for with hunting and fishing revenue, and are for hunting and fishing and kind of conservation use. Related to State Land Board, that also is, I guess, in some ways kind of also requiring hunting and fishing licenses if you're going to access State Land Board properties and in the PAP program. In some ways, that was almost already required. Our leases between State Land Board and CPW generally require that you are hunting and fishing on those properties. So, you know, if you're going to be hunting and fishing on those properties, you probably should have showed up with a hunting and fishing license, even in the past before this regulation was in place. But certainly I've gotten some questions about that. So the Parks and Wildlife Commission will be talking more about that in September. The status quo as of now is that hunting and fishing licenses are required in all state wildlife areas. There are certainly some areas where we've gotten more feedback than others, boat ramps in particular, things like that. I know there are a few state trust properties that CPW leases that are boat ramps. So we're kind of working through those case-by-case issues, and I think that will be a continuing discussion kind of along with other future funding, you know, CPW funding conversations that we'll have. So moving on from that, in the water world, you know, I think as was talked a little bit about today, for the first time since 2013, the entire state is at varying levels of drought. So kind of the drought plan has been activated, and there's a lot more resources and coordination among state agencies when that happens. And so CWCB and the Division of Water Resources are very much monitoring that situation, and hopefully, you never know what might happen in the fall. Hopefully we get some kind of late summer or early fall rains. And then finally, very relevant to the State Land Board, as we've talked about a number of times, the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission will be entering into a very busy fall of rulemakings. The end of this month and into early September, really the health and safety focused rulemakings that were required by Senate Bill 181. Our colleagues at COGCC are very, very busy preparing for those. And then soon, kind of following those core health and safety rulemakings, will be rulemakings related to wildlife. So the 1200 series and parts of the 800 and 900 series that CPW and COGCC have been very engaged in. So those are obviously big deals, and we have 5 new oil and gas commissioners as well, professional commissioners as required by Senate Bill 181. So we're in the process now of kind of getting those folks up to speed and getting them ready for a very, very busy fall. So with that, yeah, happy to take any questions. And thanks again for having me.
Doug, do you, I would imagine hunting is very compatible with COVID. Other than I know they generate a lot of revenue from out-of-state hunting licenses. Are we anticipating a fall off there, or does it look like it'll maintain traditional levels?
We have had actually, there's kind of a few answers to that question. This spring, when we do the big game draw, we saw, record applications, record participation in the draw, and kind of parallel to what we've seen for all recreation in the state over the past 6 months. So a lot of interest. You're right. A lot of the revenue that comes into CPW and a lot of that participation is from out of state, because we have the biggest elk herd really in the world. And so, we're keeping our eye on that. I mean, thankfully, COVID obviously is still causing huge problems in the state, but, we're not where we were in April. But if there was some reason that we'd had to go down that road, or, something would spike, we definitely could see some challenges with our out-of-state visitors. There are opportunities for out-of-staters now to turn in licenses and for those licenses to be reissued. And I know the Parks and Wildlife Commission has kind of made that process or allowed that process to be more flexible and kind of user-friendly, so we can make sure those licenses actually get used. I think, one worrisome thing, and just to be perfectly clear, we have not talked at all about, closing big game seasons or kind of putting restrictions on out-of-state visitors. But our neighboring state in New Mexico, I know, has kind of put quarantines or limitations on out-of-state visitors. So, it's a real concern, nothing that we are sitting down and considering right now.
Gotcha. Greg.
I would say we are starting to see some requests for rent relief, in particular from our outfitter lessees. And as you both just touched on, they're seeing cancellations from out-of-state hunters who are either uncomfortable with traveling or uncomfortable with lodging, on the other end. We will bring something to you, I anticipate next month, and probably request some direction. As we talked about a few months ago, commercial properties, give you a status report on our recreation and ag businesses and the requests we've had for COVID-based relief on those. But a little, so not to contradict anything that Doug said, just we are seeing a little bit of direct requests for relief.
Yeah, and I would say too, I mean, it's challenging. We've seen so many people visit the state, and everybody has seen the visitors and seen kind of the use of our outdoors. But the kind of paradox of COVID is that a lot of our rural areas and a lot of the economy in these rural areas have seen the impacts but haven't seen the benefits. So we were looking at some numbers the other day about how our kind of rural economy or tourism economy has retracted by $6 billion, or kind of since, I think it was just kind of through this time period since the beginning of COVID. So it's very challenging, obviously, for some of those outfitters and for some of these folks in rural areas that, despite all of the use, have not really been able to benefit from it. So,
yeah. Any other questions for Doug? Commissioner Heath?
Doug, what % of hunting and fishing licenses are sold to out-of-state folks?
I would have to go get numbers on that.
I mean is it approximate?
It's significant. There's kind of an ongoing debate about how many licenses are allocated to out-of-staters versus in-staters, and a very complicated process for doing that. I don't want to throw numbers around. I mean, it's 40%. I mean, it's high for big game licenses and things like that.
Really?
And I think that what was mentioned earlier, the big takeaway is that it's a huge amount of CPW's revenue, because out-of-state hunting licenses, I mean, for example, I think an out-of-state elk tag is somewhere around $650, $670 these days, versus an in-state tag, which is closer to $50. So the revenue that comes into CPW when it comes to out-of-state hunters and anglers is huge, and so that will have impacts. I think CPW, in terms of its finances on the wildlife side, will be able to weather you know, challenges that might happen this fall. But you know, if this continues, it could be a real challenge for the health of parks and wildlife.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Christine, Commissioner Scanlon, sorry.
I don't have a question, just a comment. I'll say Summit County, we are as full as we have ever been in the summer, sometimes meeting like Christmas capacity. It's crazy. And it's word from property managers, it's not people staying a couple of weeks, they're staying a couple of months, all out of state. So it's just totally changed the dynamic, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes into the fall. People are enrolling their kids in school, and it's very, very, very different, and it's full. We're really full of people.
It's a strange world out there. And I'd be interested to hear, I mean, if you know, kind of getting back to that, you know, kind of the economy number, if they're, you know, sitting in their condos, you know, eating food from the grocery store, as opposed to managing the businesses up there and kind of really putting money into the economy.
They are, but they are because they've closed down like Main Street, Frisco, and Breckenridge, and they have outdoor dining and such. But we can't do that in the fall. The trails are packed. Any trail, any hiking trail within 10 miles of the county's just full of people. So they're looking for things to do. I think it's helping the economy in the short term, but kind of an unclear prospect for the longer term, particularly with question marks around ski season. Yeah, it's interesting. But folks are trying to be outdoors.
Texas is representing themselves well up here.
Oh, it's probably 2/3.
Easily.
2/3.
Easily, I bet. Yeah.
Yes, without a doubt.
So, okay. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate your time. And the steady drumbeat on the shrinking trust.
Oh yeah.
We gotta stay with it.
But we'll keep working. And I will say about that, I mean, I think, you know, we've obviously been talking about this for a long time, but I think the kind of added challenge of oil and gas revenue now, you know, kind of just adds to that need to work on that. And obviously not just the fact that the kind of industry is struggling, but as well kind of the long-term questions around climate change and just energy, where our energy future will be in general. So I think those are some of the interests of the governor's office as well, even beyond just kind of the trust is shrinking.
Yeah, great. All right, well, thank you. I think you're about to be demoted.
That's fine. My dog is going to start snoring again, so you got to get me out.
Yeah. Nick is our puppeteer master. All right. We have no items for review, so we're on to our final actions. And first item, tab 7, Chico Basin Ranch disposition. And I'm back to Greg.
Yeah, I apologize. It's back to me. Oops. Okay. Do you see slides?
Yep.
A slide? Okay. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Greg Okish. I'm the Assistant Director at the State Land Board. Be talking to you about the Chico Basin Ranch lease. And I realized this morning I appreciated the thoughtful comments about the work that's being done. And I need to give credit to the whole team. Justin Osborne has been working with me, the district manager down in the South Central, on all of this. So has Matt LaFontaine and a number of other people. Both Justin and Matt are available to join us for this discussion if we have questions for them or if they have something that they'd like to comment on. So today, you are going to decide whether to lease or dispose of all or part of the agency's largest ranch property. It's a big question. And I want to emphasize that's the only decision we're making today. This is lease, or shall we move forward with a leasing scenario, or is there some part of the ranch that we should dispose of? And this is the decision process diagram we referred to during the workshop today. I put it up as a reminder of where we're headed. Today's decision about lease or sell will give staff the direction we need to then facilitate the next parts of the conversation. The next piece was originally envisioned as what rights are being leased. I think what I heard this morning is may have a little bit of a preface to that. I'll have to think about how we do this, but how do we set some high-level goals for what we want to accomplish so that you can frame the discussion around what's being leased through those goals. And once we've established what rights are being leased, we will talk about how is it being leased. That would be the part where we talk about, is it a request for proposals that is issued to only Box T partners so we can negotiate with them, or is an RFP that we put out for public response so that we get multiple bids. So that'll be a third or fourth part of this, depending on how you want to frame it. And then ultimately, as I said, I guess in a question dialogue, Commissioner Butterworth, with you, the outcomes are essentially financial outcomes for the trust, whether those are framed through a stewardship lens or a financial lens. They all have to do with hold for the long term and generate revenue through leasing, or if this may be this I anticipate will be off the table today. At one point we were saying, is there NSE revenue that might be reinvested? So that's our process over the next few months, and we can continue to be flexible because we have a lot of time. We have, in this case, the benefit of time. We can continue to be flexible in terms of adding a component for goal setting or spending more than 1 month on a part of this. It doesn't have to be done in a time framework that you're on. It can be done in a time framework that you are very comfortable with. So that's the framework we're working through. The ranch itself is located, straddles the line between El Paso and Pueblo counties. And as we've discussed in previous meetings, this is I-25 on the left-hand side. You see Colorado Springs in the far upper left-hand corner of this slide, and Pueblo towards the bottom. The Chico Basin Ranch is this, I don't know what this color is called. It's a purple color. So this L-shaped or U-shaped configuration. It's in a part of the state where we own a lot of other property. The State Land Board owns a lot of other property. This is the 40,000 acre federal test track lease. Up above in the kind of reddish brown is the Bohart Ranch. And then we have a number of large leases, the Hanna lease, the Frost Livestock lease. So we have a large assemblage, over 250,000 acres in this single sort of concentrated location. Looking at a little more closely focused now, zoomed in, if you will, and looking only at or looking primarily, here's the Chico Basin Ranch again. Can you see my cursor?
I can, yes.
Okay. So that, again, U-shaped area. This is the diagram that staff prepared to evaluate whether there was a logical or desirable way to subdivide the 86,000 acre ranch into multiple ranches. And we did this based on soil type. You see the blue lines on here, that's the watering system. The black dashed line are roads. We looked at where the ranch improvements were, headquarters, houses, homes, that types of things that would support leasing. And our conclusion was that there is, if desired, there is a logical way based on those components to create a 3-ranch subdivision, if you will. The original question was, and I'll get to this in a minute, was, do we do that because there are some parts of the ranch that we might want to dispose of, choose to dispose of? We will, again, although it's not a question on the table today, this diagram will come back at some point because we will have to make a decision about how we lease it. And it's still, I think, an open question as to how we choose to lease the ranch. But for purposes of whether or not we sell a portion of the ranch, I just wanted to put this up. We were initially proposing that this, the easternmost portion, this green color here, could be considered for disposal. Are there any questions about that?
Nope.
So in table form, we originally, when we started this conversation several months ago, looked at 4 scenarios. And scenario 1 was to dispose, and then on this side, the choices were dispose or lease. Scenario 1 was to dispose of the entire ranch. And I don't think, well, staff never recommended that we pursue that. And it was clear from our earlier conversations that the board didn't support that. So we really focused on scenarios 2, 3, and 4. In scenario 2, we would dispose of none of the ranch. Scenario 3 would dispose of none of the ranch. And scenario 4 was one where we thought of, we considered disposing of that 3rd ranch, the easternmost portion. And then the lease scenarios where each of those were the logical. If you don't dispose of any, you would lease all of it. At this point, based on the feedback we heard from the commissioners in last month's meeting, our takeaway was there was not significant support for a disposal of any part of the ranch at this time, and staff is comfortable with that. We support that that position. So at this point, we're really down to talking about scenarios 2 and 3. And the request, I believe, that was made by the board last month was to take the feedback we'd received. I think there was a specific comment on sharpen our pencil on some of the financial. Well, to reiterate, last month we had some folks who talked about the Red Top Ranch as an analogous sort of process where they were trying to figure out buy, sell, lease, or how do you keep it in the hands of local agricultural producers as an outcome. And then we had presentations by, or a panel discussion by a number of ranch brokers. And I think the board at the end of that said, you know, based on what you heard to staff, based on what you heard, go back, sharpen your pencil, revise these financial models that you've shown us, and come back and tell us what the results are. So that's the first set of 3 slides I'm going to go through here. And then I'm going to talk about stewardship a little bit. So first of all, what we did in terms of things that affect the financial models. In terms of real estate values, a month ago, the models we gave you reflected a range of real estate values depending on the size of the ranch, the location. We, although we still have a little bit of variation because there's we went into detail in your cover sheet. You know, the ranches, in theory, the 3 ranches would not be of equal value because one of them, the largest one, has the majority of the improvements on it. It has the majority of the riparian habitat versus the smallest one has no homes on it. So there is some differentiation in value, but we dialed back the values. I think we're being more conservative now in the values we're proposing in the current models. The lease rates, in the original models, I think we're realistic, although I don't know what this amounts to. I was going to say realistic in maybe a more aggressive way. We believed and still believe that if we were putting smaller ranches, still large, 20 to 40,000 acres, out for bid, based on our experience in the last few years, we would be likely to see AUM bids in the $20 to $25 range, maybe even higher. We reflected that in the models last month. For purposes of these models, we've dialed them all, they're all the same. We've used a $25 assumed AUM rate, and we haven't assumed any differentiation between the ranches. You remember the conversation about the value premium. If we were to sell a small ranch versus a large ranch? Would we see any difference, increase in value? For purposes of evaluating scenario 4, we've assumed no value premium. So consistently, we've gotten more conservative. These last two are worth highlighting, are definitely worth highlighting and seeing if there's any input from the board, because they make a huge difference in the outcomes. We reran all of our numbers based on data we had from 2016 when we had an appraisal on the Bohart. And then we had to figure out how to appreciate. We applied that to Chico Basin Ranch, and we had to decide how to carry the value, appreciate the value of the ranch for the 4 or 5 years between the date that appraisal was done and today. Historically, the ranch appears to have appreciated on an annual basis at about 6%. I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but one of them is because we really bought the ranch right. We got it for a good price. Now, partly because it was sort of run down and we needed to invest in the improvements, but I think that 6% appreciation rate over the first 15 years had a lot to do with the ranch making investment in the ranch and improving investing in the improvements on the ranch. And staff is not comfortable saying the ranch is just going to appreciate at 6% a year forever. We just don't think it's logical. So we dialed it back to 2%. Conversely, we did take the point of view that if you sold part of the ranch and reinvested that in some other asset, and not necessarily the permanent fund, but maybe the permanent fund, maybe a commercial office building, maybe something else, you would likely see a 5% return. Now, if you disagree with either of those assumptions, or if you think the assumption should be that they both appreciate, the ranch would appreciate at 2, and the NSC funds would return, you're going to get the same on the next table. When I show it, there's going to be no difference in the answers because your investment and appreciation are going to be exactly the same. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
So what I'm saying is if you held the ranch and it appreciates at 2% a year, and then you sold part of the ranch and bought another asset and it only earns a total return of 2% a year, they're the same. So this set of assumptions results on the next slide in a difference of outcomes, but you've got to sort of believe that they're assumptions. You got to believe that these are the right assumptions. I think it's going to make no difference to you because we're not going to recommend a sale anyway, but I wanted you to understand why there's a difference in the models. Should I continue?
Yes, you're holding me in suspense.
Nope. Okay. So what we modeled for you is the existing lease terms here. Scenario 2, which is leasing the ranch in its, I'll say, current configuration, 86,000 acres is a single lease in the second column. Leasing it as 3 units in the third column. And then Commissioner Butterworth, you specifically had said, well, before we take disposing of one of the ranches off the table, I'd like to know what we're talking about in terms of what's the order of magnitude of the outcome. Mm-hmm. And so we did model scenario 4, which is leasing 2 units and selling 1, even though we don't intend to recommend selling 1. And I'm scrambling here just a minute because I realized your beautiful faces cover up the 4th column, so I can't see what's in it. And I need the answer before I can go on. Okay. So here we go. So, and then the metrics that I think have some meaning are listed down the left-hand side. So one metric would be, what's the average annual rent of any given scenario? Well, the current rent on the lease is about $310,000. Staff believes that a market rate, but a market rate if you get $20 to $25 per AUM and are compensated for the recreation use of the property, is closer to $700,000. It's double. Scenario 4 would generate less annual rent, but that's because you've sold one piece, so you're only leasing two pieces. That's the reason for that. The annual dividend that you achieve, and that's the rent divided by the value of the property. And we used, let me think about this, we carried the 2% appreciation forward to 2024 because this is when that decision, your decision would be, or these results would actually occur. You wouldn't lease it till 2024. So we have an appreciated value of property till 2024. But you can see, and it's logical, if you're leasing the property for almost twice as much, your return is going to be double. But I think the important part is right now we are below a 1% annual dividend. It's like if you owned, it actually is a lot like owning a bond, a government bond today. It's paying less than 1%. We think we could improve on that. There's really not a significant, meaningful difference between the scenarios, in my opinion. They're all in the 1.75 kind of range. Obviously, only one scenario generates NSE funds, and our estimate was that if you were to dispose of the ranch number 3, you would generate about $5.5 million. So if you try to get to a estimated financial contribution to the school trust, and we did this over a 10-year period, so this presumes a 10-year lease. So what we did is say, well, starting in 2024 and going through 2034, 10 years of this rent amount is $6.7 million, et cetera, et cetera. The asset appreciation is this figure, and that's the 2%. These two are the same because we own the entire ranch, and this one is smaller because we've sold one property. And then the final component is if you sold part of the property and reinvested those proceeds at and earned 5%, you would generate this figure over 10 years. So, oops, I guess I would jump through this. So bottom line, the differences in those scenarios is that scenario 2 and 3, theoretically, staff's estimate generated about $14.5 million. And scenario 4, which we're not recommending any longer, but you wanted to see what you were, quote, might be giving up, would generate $2.5 million more than that. Entirely because of the reinvestment of the NSE proceeds at a higher return than what the property is appreciating at.
Okay.
Any questions or on that before I go on?
Just really quick, the current Box T lease, did that have like escalators? Like, did the rent go up by like CPI? Do I recall reading that?
No, it went, Justin, I'm gonna ask you to jump in. Short answer is I believe it's reviewed every 5 years. But Justin, can you go into more detail?
Yeah, that is correct. Similar to all of our other grazing leases that we readjust every 3 years. With the Chico, they're locked in for 5 years, and we renegotiate the terms for the price per AUM every 5 years. So, other than, go ahead.
I'm sorry, has it been a negotiation, or have we actually just reset it to the minimum rate for those counties?
It is somewhat of a negotiation. It's if the board can recall our grazing tier levels, the large ranches are tier 4, and that's normally the rate that they are set at. So there is some negotiations that do occur with that related to some of the other deals, but for the most part, it is set straight at what the tier 4 levels are on our grazing rates at the time.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
I do not intend to ignore stewardship. I think as we talked last month, Lindsay, and Lindsay's on the phone as well, if we want to ask her to join us for the discussion. But it's clear there are significant natural values on the ranch, and that from viewed through the lens of our stewardship mission, the mission of the agency to pursue stewardship on its lands, that there are significant things that should be protected and enhanced on the property. We talked about the fact that if we want to ensure stewardship, it's difficult to achieve if we dispose of a property. The only way we could probably do that is to put a conservation easement in place first, unless we put some limitations on it first. A disposal is a disposal, and the new owner has the right to do what they want. We did talk about the fact that with lessees, we have an ability to influence stewardship. We can select lessees that have the capacity to accomplish our stewardship goals on a property. And we talked about the potential impact to the stewardship trust if we were to dispose of part of this property. And this is the map we looked at as a reminder. About 38,000 acres of the ranch, highlighted in these pink crosshatches, are in the stewardship trust. That's 44% of the ranch. Maybe equally importantly, it's 13% of the stewardship trust. And certainly pertinent to this conversation, this is the portion of the ranch staff initially was recommending disposing of. So there was an entire overlap between stewardship trust and potential disposal. And so going back to my previous 2 points, there would be no way necessarily to assure future stewardship if we disposed of it. So staff's decision, I call them decision factors, but the way we came to the conclusion that not disposing part of the property at this point is a very reasonable position to take is that based on the information we received last month, particularly I think from the brokers, it appears that we have been and are earning a reasonable total return, revenue plus appreciation on the asset. What we've earned historically is consistent with what investors are looking for when they purchase this kind of a property. Staff believes that there's a strong opportunity that new leases will increase revenue. The return on the proceeds from a disposition were not particularly compelling. I think this was a point that multiple commissioners made, that we do have a goal of reducing, or we have had a goal historically of reducing our geographic kind of concentration that I showed you in this part of the state. But we can probably accomplish that goal through the disposition of other assets. I believe I heard at least 2 commissioners say that wasn't a compelling goal as it related to this asset in particular. And I think there's still a question that we'll deal with when we get to how we lease the property, which is what we've called sort of the lease risk. Do you have more or less lease risk with one or multiple lessees? But disposition is not a strategy that's required to address lease risk, so I'll just leave it at that for now. And finally, that the disposition, we have other ways of achieving our stewardship outcomes short of a disposition here. In fact, it's more likely we can accomplish them without a disposition. So those were the factors staff considered to make our recommendation. And then this is maybe one of the most peculiar recommendations or board orders I've ever tried to craft, but I want to be clear about sort of setting some expectations, maybe in particular for folks on the phone. So the board order was trying to get to this. At this point, we would like the board, staff is recommending the board make a decision not to dispose of any part of the ranch at this time. And assuming that we can go through this whole leasing process over the next, or negotiation process over the next 3 years, and we can achieve the desired financial and stewardship outcomes that you all want, that are reasonable, then we would, the recommendation is to hold it through 2034, at least for a 10-year period. What I was concerned about is if the staff recommendation was simply hold it for 10 more years, and we went through this 3-year process, and for some reason, we can achieve the outcomes that you've defined as important. I didn't want members of the public to come back and say, well, wait, you can't sell it now because you said you'd keep it. Staff wants to be clear that if we can't accomplish the goals you set out for this property, we may come back in 3 years and say, you know what, we are so far short of finding a way to accomplish these goals, we would like you to revisit the decision to hold. But right now, at this time, we're confident that we can achieve the goals. And so the recommendation based on our confidence is approve the staff recommendation to hold it through at least 2034. I don't know if Ed's about to chime in and tell me that's the oddest recommendation he's ever seen, but at this time, staff recommends the board hold the Chico Basin Ranch until 2034. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
I appreciate that caveat because I do know, there's a tendency to take things very literally, and I appreciate that you're preserving our right if we find ourselves in a position which we all believe is highly unlikely, but that if we are in a position, we have the opportunity to revisit the decision. So I think that's entirely reasonable.
This is John. I would feel more comfortable if it said until at least 2034, but didn't put a finite cap on that.
I agree. Yeah, Commissioner Heath. You're on mute.
Could we at least also add that continue to hold the entire Chico Basin Ranch in that motion until at least 20?
Yes. I would agree with that.
Any questions for Greg at this time, or follow-up clarification desired? I would share Sorry, I was getting an echo there. I'm getting an echo.
I think we need Commissioner Shaw to mute.
Sorry about that. Okay. I do want to acknowledge that I believe we've received over 100 public comments submitted online, as well as each of the commissioners has received, I want to say, no fewer than 4 or 5 written letters from a variety of stakeholders, the vast majority of which spoke in opposition to either disposal and or perhaps more importantly, separating the ranch or dividing the ranch into 3 areas. And I think it's important to recognize both to the public that those do reach us, and that perspective is shared, but also gives us some additional insight into the attitudes towards this particular asset in this community and to a variety of stakeholder groups. Okay, I guess I will, if there are no questions or comments for Greg right now, I'll ask if there are members of the public who wish to make comment on this agenda item, and sort of understanding that we've received and read a good swath from a variety of conservation groups, Audubon groups, local universities, general members of the public weighing in on and making their opinion known on this matter. That said, if you would like to address the commission and share a comment, you should have an option to raise your hand as a participant, and in doing so, then Nick Massey will sort of invite you all individually to address the board. And at this time, I do see one hand, a couple hands raised. So Nick, if we want to maybe Sieta, I don't know if that's the proper pronunciation, but.
Yep, so I've allowed Sieta to speak. Yep.
Yes, my name is Sieta Moss. Although I'm a member of the Arkansas Valley Audubon Society, I'm speaking as an individual. I was a part of the original proposal to place Chico Basin and Stewardship Trust, actually wrote our comments on that. And I think that it proves out from the financial statistics that were presented today that the placement of this ranch in Stewardship Trust, where it was not subdivided, where it was not leased out to other entities that would not conserve the great natural values of the ranch, that has been a very, very productive thing for this land board. It has gained in value. It has continued to be a big asset without very, very much spending by anyone other than the persons that did the lease or that were on the lease. So I certainly strongly encourage you to continue the recommendation to the board to keep all 3 sections of the ranch, the entire ranch, in whole, as leased out as one entity, not subdivided, not sold, but continued for the natural values, the stewardship of those values. Thank you, gentlemen. And by the way, you did pronounce my name correct. It is
Okay,
Sieta.
yeah, thank you. And ladies on the commission. So thank you for your comments. Are there any questions for Ms. Moss? Okay. Do you want to promote Ms. Hodges?
You bet. Ms. Hodges, you're able to speak at this time.
Thank you. Hi, Linda Hodges with the Aiken Audubon Society. I believe you've all are familiar with my position of keeping the ranch intact and with one lessee, so I won't elaborate. I did want to say many of us were surprised at the brief notice we had of your vote coming up, which we received a week ago in the board packet. May I ask, is that typical to have 1 week notice?
Yeah.
Greg?
Well, I guess a 2-part answer. It's typical that our board package is made public 1 week before the meeting, and that's when the public has access to it. Although in this instance, I think as we described earlier, I think it was made very clear at last month's meeting that there would be a workshop and then a request for a decision this month. So I don't know, we can put you, if you're not already, we can put you on the list to make sure you get our board package or our agenda every month. But if you're following consistently, last month there was in fact, for the last several months, there have been Chico Basin discussion items, and I think the notion of the vote coming up was actually pretty clear in those discussions.
Okay, my apologies. I do get those. And,
No need to apologize.
oh, and Greg, you may be the person to ask this question of as well. The discussion regarding potential along the line division of the ranch, will there be notice and public comment allowed for that vote as well?
I'm anticipating, Commissioner Butterworth, I'm going to turn this over to you in a minute. I'm anticipating that's going to be a workshop item during next month's meeting. I don't know that I would ask the board to vote on the goals. I don't know that that's a decision item as much as it is a device we'll use to guide the other votes on things like what rights are we going to lease, and but I would defer to whatever the board wants to do around that item.
Well, I mean, I think our process throughout, we understand there's great interest in this, and that, you know, I feel like our staff has done a really good job at dating back to maybe August, when you initially sort of telegraphed that we wanted to begin this process well ahead of the lease expiration.
Yeah. August of 2019.
Right, yeah. So I would anticipate absolutely along the way that we'll continue to enable the public to provide comment as we work through our process.
Thank you for that. And I'll just close by saying I appreciate that many comments were made on behalf of conservation values and that sort of thing. And just so you know, my background is in finance, so I do fully appreciate your direction to raise revenue. And I do keep that in mind as well. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Commissioner Heath, it look like you might have been wanting to weigh in on something? I could be wrong. Sorry. You're good?
Thank you. I'm good. I had to change venues.
Okay. All right. I am looking at the attendee list and I don't see any other hands up. So I will assume, here we go. One more.
Mr. Milenich.
Milenich, yeah.
Sir, you've been provided the ability to talk. You might have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I want to thank the commissioners for giving me an opportunity today to speak a little bit about Chico Basin Ranch. I've also submitted a written comment about it. You know, one thing I want to say is that I believe, you know, in sending you a comment, I looked at the State Land Board's new 2026 strategic goals. And I just wanted to say that I think Chico Basin is a property that epitomizes all four of those goals in a way I don't think many of your properties can. And I think that's something that really should be considered in deciding to continue with ranch lands or Box T as a leaseor and giving them you know, an extended lease of 25 years. I'd strongly support that. I've been listening to the discussion with Box T this morning, and one of the things I wanted to address was Commissioner Butterworth, you had kind of posed a question to the board asking, essentially, you know, there's been a lot of comments about breaking up the habitat at Chico and splitting it up into 3 separate parcels, and does that fall outside the boundaries of our mission to benefit the beneficiaries of the trust? And one of the things I want to say about that is I think that squarely falls within that definition. You know, as a lot of commenters, I believe, have commented, Chico Basin's a very unique property. It's one of the largest parcels remaining of that type of habitat of the shortgrass prairie. So I think one thing the board really should strongly consider is that maintaining this property and conserving it in a way that Ranchlands has been doing since they've leased it is really what's going to maintain the long-term value of this property. This property is something that its uniqueness is what gives it the value. So I think, you know, in terms of Commissioner Butterworth's question, I think the issue of breaking up this habitat into 3 parcels, it squarely falls within the mission of the board in terms of maintaining the long-term value for the beneficiaries, enhancing it. One of the things Duke spoke about was appreciation of the asset. And I think the way this property has been managed for the last 25 years approximately, and hopefully will be managed for the next 25 years, gives this property the best ability to appreciate. It's not a type of property that's really obtainable in much of the nation anymore because of habitat loss. So, you know, I know Commissioner Butterworth was asking about that question. I think that squarely falls into goals 1 and 2 in your strategic plan. I think the way that Ranchlands has managed this property, I've met those folks out there, Duke and Tess and, you know, Duke the Fourth. I've talked to them about how they do things out there. I've seen firsthand how they do things out there, and it's really impressive. And I think it really falls within the mission the board set out in these 4 goals. In my written submission, I've kind of talked about that quite a bit too. Another thing I wanted to mention to the commissioners is that, prior to visiting Chico Basin Ranch a number of years ago, I never really knew about the State Land Board at all. I didn't know it existed. I didn't know what it has done. And in the time I've spent at Chico, I've learned quite a bit about the Land Board. And, one of your goals, goal number 4, is to broadcast what the agency does and its positive impact on Colorado. Quite honestly, I can't think of a place that does a better job of that than Chico Basin Ranch. I'm fortunate enough that I volunteer with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies bird banding program, primarily at Chatfield and Barr Lake State Park here, closer to the Front Range. But I've also spent a fair amount of time down at Chico's banding station and spent a fair amount of time on the Chico property, birding and observing wildlife. And it's a really special property. And as Duke and some other folks have pointed out today, there's not a lot of other properties like this. So I think there's been some questions by the commissioners today about, well, should we be treating this property differently than we treat other leases? I think the unique characteristics of this property is exactly why you should. And it's not to give special treatment to, ranch lands or treat them differently. It's not solely focused on the great education and research and all of that takes place at the ranch. I've seen school children out there at the banding programs and really seen a spark in them. I think it's really about appreciating this value and the value of this property and maintaining it long term, and not, the risk of splitting up this property is, Duke and some others have pointed out, if you have 3 different managers managing it 3 different ways, you are going to fragment what is this, intact parcel into 3 different distinct habitats. So I hope the commissioners consider that in moving forward, and thank you for letting me have a chance to talk to you folks.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Are there any, before we let you go, any questions for Mr. Milenich? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Heath, I see you're off mute. Going to take that as a signal. No? All right, a poor read on my part. All right, well, are there any other comments or discussion on this? If not, I certainly, we have a proposed motion order, and I'd be willing to accept that.
So move.
And Commissioner Shaw, you are proposing or moving the board order as in our handbook with the additions that Commissioner Heath made, which was that it's in our best interest to hold the entirety of Chico Basin Ranch in the property portfolio through at least 2034. Is that correct? Commissioner Shaw, is that what you were moving?
That is correct.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Shaw. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Commissioner Scanlon. I'll take a roll call vote, but I will ask for, is there any further discussion? Commissioner Heath? You're on mute. You're on mute. Commissioner Heath, you're on mute.
In the original draft, it talks about provided that new leases, and we're really just talking about a lease, aren't we?
Not necessarily. I mean, we might have a lease for grazing and a lease for recreation, or we might, I think you don't know yet if you're talking about one lease.
I see, okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. Moved by Commissioner Shaw, second by Commissioner Scanlon. Any further comment? I will all in favor indicate by saying aye, and I'll do it roll call vote. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
That was an aye. Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Great. Thank you, Greg and Justin and the entire team. It's been a very thorough process, and I appreciate your patience and diligence in this. We'll move on to final action item 2B, tab 8, Badger Hills Land for Land Exchange, and I believe we have Christopher Smith.
Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Christopher Smith, the Real Estate Section Manager with the State Land Board. I'm here today to recommend that the board approve a land for land exchange and issue a 99-year right-of-way to Xcel Energy for the purpose of building an electrical switchyard. The switchyard is necessary to accept the power from NextEra's Thunderwolf solar project that the board approved back in June. This solar project is expected to earn the board approximately $36 million over the term of the lease. All of the properties in this exchange are located in central Pueblo County, about 15 miles southeast of the city of Pueblo. Property 1, located in orange here, is the future Mirasol switchyard site. Property 2 is the black crosshatch here, which is the site of the 99-year right-of-way. And property 3 in red is the land that the board would receive from Xcel Energy. So by way of some background, in 2018, Xcel Energy adopted its Colorado Energy Plan. This plan calls for the utility to move to 55% renewable energy by 2026, and they'll do that by buying or building 1,100 megawatts of wind plus 700 megawatts of solar. And this Mirasol switchyard supports the solar in Pueblo County. Earlier this year, in June, the State Land Board approved NextEra's Thunderwolf solar lease. This lease has 200 megawatts of solar capacity plus 100 megawatts of storage capacity. It is located on just under 2,500 acres of state trust land surrounding the Mirasol site. And again, it'll produce $36 million to the board over the term of the lease. Mirasol switchyard is located right in the donut hole of the Thunderwolf solar project. Sorry, having some trouble changing slides there. So staff has been working with Xcel for the past several years to get this switchyard located on state trust land. Property 1 is the future switchyard site, which would transfer to Xcel. The board would also issue a perpetual access easement along the pink line here to the west of the site, because this site is fully surrounded by state trust land. And as always, we'll reserve the minerals. Property 2 is the black crosshatch here, which is the site of the 99-year right-of-way the board would issue to Xcel. This right-of-way is meant to accommodate future power lines, and Xcel originally requested that they buy the land from us, but staff believes that selling it would bifurcate the rest of the land too much. So this right-of-way would be non-exclusive and non-assignable, so the board will have the ability to layer future rights-of-way within this right-of-way and charge then current fees for the right-of-way. And Xcel's intention really is to keep this corridor open for future rights, for future power lines coming in from other developers. They do not necessarily intend to build a line in the corridor itself. And then lastly, property 3 are these two properties that the board will receive. All these properties, all the values for these properties were discussed in executive session.
Chris?
Yep.
Can you go back?
Sure.
When you said they offered to purchase, are you saying they offered to just purchase the black hashed area, or were they offering to purchase the larger swath of land?
They were offering to purchase the black area in addition to the orange area here as fee simple, and not anything else around it.
And how is our surface in the rest of the blue area around this proposed switchyard? Is that, are we leasing that? Is that grazed, or is it just open right now?
No, that's a great question. It's currently grazed, but the board just leased this green, everything inside the green line to NextEra Energy or
Oh,
to
right.
NextEra for
It's
the
poor
Thunderwolf
quality.
solar project.
Yeah, it's poor quality. Okay.
So it's all of this is sort of hand in glove, so to speak. The switch yard is necessary to accommodate the future.
I forgot about it. Yeah, got it. Okay.
So great questions though. Okay, so so all of the land that the board will either dispose of or encumber with a right-of-way totals 314 acres. The red lands that we will receive from Excel totals 360 acres for a net benefit to the board of 45 acres. There's several benefits to this exchange. First, the land we're receiving is accretive to the rest of the land around it. It will form a nice block. It's of greater size and greater value. This facilitates the Thunderwolf solar project, and it may also facilitate future solar projects on other state trust lands that would use this switch yard. It supports the board's strategic goals as well as the governor's goal of being 100% by 2040. And there are positive fiscal impacts on local schools. So our district manager, Justin Osborne, has looked at the land and rated it as fair quality. So it's fairly sandy land. It's not great quality. We also reached out to the lessee on this land who does not object to this land exchange. And upon closing, the grazing lease would reduce by the 204 acres where the switch yard is. So because of all of this, staff is recommending that the board approve the exchange of the fee interest in 204.14 acres as is and including access, and issue a 99-year non-exclusive, non-assignable right-of-way with consent rights on an additional 110.3 acres in Pueblo County to Excel Energy in exchange for 360 acres of rangeland in Pueblo County. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I would also say that there's a representative from Excel who is in the audience. So if you have any questions directly for Excel, Ted is available for that as well.
Chris, when it says non-assignable, does that, I mean, a scenario where Excel is acquired, would that then, I mean, is it like we treat any other times where somebody wishes to make an assignment, it comes back to the board for approval? Is that?
Yes, so in this case, non-assignable means that they do not have the assignment right in their right-of-way to just automatically transfer it to another party. We wanted the ability to be able to layer leases within this right-of-way. But it also says, you'll note that we're giving them consent rights, so they have the ability to consent to future power lines going in, but it's their intent to preserve these corridors for that exact use.
Okay. Questions for Christopher or Excel? Okay, are there members of the public who wish to make comment? If so, you may do so by raising your hand. And I'm scanning. I
not seeing any, Commissioner.
Don't see any. So with there are no questions or comments, I would entertain a motion. And maybe the board order is pretty extensive, so perhaps a motion approving the board order as presented in our packet and presented in this meeting today would suffice.
I move to approve the board order in the packet as presented on the exchange that was just presented.
All right, it's been moved by Commissioner Carney. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Scanlon. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath? Commissioner Shaw? I believe I saw an aye. Yeah. Commissioner Shaw weighs in with an aye. Commissioner Heath, can you unmute? And you're still muted.
I'm an aye.
Okay, there you go. Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Great. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you all.
Our next item, 2C, Retzlaff Farm Acquisition, tab 9. And I believe we have Mike Pollard presenting. I don't see him.
We're working on it.
See
the wheels of progress.
Oh, there he is.
There it is. Moving a little too fast.
Sorry.
No, we are. You're not.
Oh, Mike?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Trying to find my presentation. Tracy, if you can hear me, I know it's on my desktop, but I am not able to find it.
Give me permission to control your screen for a moment, please. Thank you. Is it this one?
Yes, it is. Nope, that is not it.
Okay.
Just above the Google Chrome shortcut. Retzlaff. No. The shortcut. Go back to the desktop. Yeah, there you go. All right, Mike, I think we're good.
Can we see it?
Yep.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Mike Pollard, Southeast District Manager of the State Land Board. I am here today to talk to you about the Retzlaff Farm acquisition. This is a final action item that will be requested at the end. I will give a little history, a recommendation, and then make time for some questions. The Retzlaff Farm is located in southeast Colorado in Bent County, approximately 15 miles west of the city of Lamar in Prowers County, about 3 miles east of the town of McClave, and about 1 mile south of Highway 50. This is Highway 50. This is the location of this. This is an irrigated parcel. As you can see, it's kind of the bread and butter of the Arkansas Valley, with we're seeing sprinkler irrigation and flood irrigation, and that there is a lot of that goes on in this. This particular parcel, the water is delivered through a series of small ditches that distribute the water around it. This property has been owned by the Retzlaff family for approximately 80 years. There's 192 acres of irrigated property with 164 shares of Fort Lyon water. This makes the actual acquisition of this a prime suspect, as you can see, for a sprinkler irrigation for two reasons: a lot better, more efficient distribution of the water, and for the labor that is involved in an irrigated parcel. If this is approved by the board, staff will return at some point requesting the acquisition of a center pivot sprinkler to be put on this for the reasons we just stipulated. Staff recommends the board approve the purchase of 192 plus or minus acres of land in Bent County and the associated 164 shares of Fort Lyon Canal water at the price discussed in executive session. And if you have any questions, I will answer them now.
Thank you, Mike. Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, I don't see anybody. And then for members of our public, anybody who wish to make a comment or ask a question, just raise your hand. And I see none.
Correct.
What's that?
Correct.
Okay,
None.
I thought you said Greg. Okay. All right, seeing no discussion or questions, I would entertain a motion.
I so move that as the decision is included in our packet, after consideration of the materials presented at our meeting today, we determine it's in the best interest of the trust that we approve the purchase of 192.17 acres of land in Benton County and the associated 164 shares of Fort Lyon Water for a price not to exceed the amount presented in executive session. And we've determined that it will not reasonably impact the development on local school districts and state funding of education. And we delegate to the director a draft and order and take appropriate action consistent with our decision.
Thank you, Commissioner Heath. Moved by Commissioner Heath. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Scanlon. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw? I heard an aye. Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Moving along, our next item, State Forest State Park Campground, tab 10. And we've got Abe and Joe Brand from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Abe, are you gonna introduce it? Great.
Yes, I will. I'll introduce it. So good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, Abraham Medina, Recreation Program Manager for the State Land Board. And so this afternoon, I'm here in front of you to give staff's recommendation for approval of capital improvements proposed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife at the North Park Campground, which is in the State Forest State Park. I'm joined this afternoon by Joe Brand. Joe just joined by video. Joe is the park manager at the State Forest State Park with CPW, and he will be delivering the presentation on this item. But before I turn it over to Joe, I just want to describe why this item is in front of you this afternoon. First, the State Forest is under a long-term lease with Colorado Parks and Wildlife for use as a state park. As part of the 2017 lease renewal, the lease required that CPW invest $2.2 million in capital improvement dollars into park facilities. And the lease did identify a number of priority areas for these improvements to occur, with the highest priority being given to the North Park Campground. Finally, the lease does require that the State Land Board approve the proposed improvements on the State Forest, which is why Joe is in front of you today to present the proposed improvements here at the park. So before I turn it over to Joe, are there any questions with that information? If not,
I would just compliment you on your COVID hair. See, you're staying strong.
Thank you very much. I took it as a good opportunity to grow it out. So.
There you go. Good.
I'll turn it over to Joe Brand.
Great. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Commissioners. And thanks, Abe, for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. I do have some people that were trying to be on the call with me. One is our project manager, Russ Adzit, and he's Northwest Region project manager and is overseeing the North Park Campground project. Another is David Graff, who is one of our water resources managers out of the Northwest region. He got stuck trying to get from Denver back to Grand Junction. So with the fire in Glenwood Canyon, I know he's trying to be on the phone, but he keeps running in and out of cell coverage. And then also with me in the conference room here is Wade Mason, which is a park resource technician. So those are the folks that are really the movers behind the scenes. I'm just here to kind of tell you where we're at with the North Park Campground and try to give you an idea on where we're proceeding. So I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen here.
While you're working on that, I just want to point out that Russ was on earlier, but I don't see him on right now. Just letting you know that.
Thank you for checking on that. I appreciate it. And I know that he was supposed to head out right at 1:30 for another meeting that he had. So unfortunately, our timing is a little bit off on our side. So apologize for that. So anyways, again, I'm the park manager assigned to State Forest State Park, which is located on the eastern side of Jackson County and the north central portion of the state. We did agree in the 2017 lease that was executed and started on July 1st of 2017 to make a $2.2 million investment into several different areas, but predominantly the North Park Campground, which many people know as the old KOA campground, which resided on State Land Board property for roughly 50 years. And was recently the assets were purchased by the State Land Board, and it was managed privately for about 3 years. And then Colorado Parks and Wildlife took over management of those assets. We began the planning process in December of 2017 to meet the goal of investing that $2.2 million by the required deadline, which was 2022. We began with assessments that were done on the facilities, mostly regarding the infrastructure, so all the utility lines which needed to be upgraded. And so roughly, including the master plan and the assessments, roughly $150,000 has been spent to date. Of the initial allocation that Colorado Parks and Wildlife put forward, which was $400,000 to start the planning and assessment process. The master plan landscape design was put together for North Park Campground, showing the future goals and changes. So on the map that's up on your screen now, Can you see my pointer on your screens?
Yep.
Thank you. So this area that I'm circling here is considered Loop A. This area here is considered Loop B. This area here is considered Loop C. Then we have some existing basic cabins, some existing, well, a combination of existing and proposed deluxe cabins, which includes a shower and toilet facility within the cabins. The basic cabins just have beds but no facilities. And then a host campsites here to help support the campground and support the camper registration building, which is on the south end of the park. So this here is basically our long-term future vision for North Park Campground. Unfortunately, not to be confused with our short-term vision of what we'll be doing in the next couple of years. The long-term build-out would be cost prohibitive at this time for CPW to take on entirely. So our focus is going to be working on Loop A, Loop B, a brand new camper services building, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about, and the camper registration building, and then maintaining our existing deluxe sites and our volunteer host areas. So one of the initial things that we needed to work on was water related to use of the area. So providing commercial drinking water, we have to have a permit with the Division of Water Resources. Currently, there is 2 wells on the site. Well number 1, which was the original well that was developed in North Park Campground. And then which was basically in the late 60s that was created. And then well number 2, which we don't have an exact date on when that was drilled, but it commingled water with well 1 and well 2. So we have requested from Division of Water Resources to recognize well 1 as a pre-existing well and authorize a well permit for well 1. And then the intention is to transfer that right to well number 2 and then abandon well 1. And the reason for that is that well 1 is a lower producing well than well number 2. So well number 2 will become the primary well to service the campground and will include a new water treatment facility for that campground. The camper services building, which I pointed out on the map, is basically what we call a restroom and shower facility for the visitors. So this is the interior layout. We got 3 toilets on both a men's side and a women's side, and 3 showers, including ADA accessible facilities in both, along with 2 sinks on each side. And so this new facility will be ADA compliant versus the existing facilities in the campground do not meet ADA requirement. And because there is such a significant amount of changes being made to these buildings and the campground facilities, we are required to bring it up to ADA compliance. In the backside of that building will be a new water treatment facility. So this area here that's basically unspecified of the building is actually where a water treatment facility that meets CDPHE guidelines will be constructed.
Joe, is this all new construction, did you say?
The camper services building is all a brand new construction building. The original facilities were housed in what we call the camper registration building, which was the old KOA building. Yeah. And so this will be a new location that'll be more cost effective to bring it up to ADA compliance and build the required treatment facility. Thank you for that question. Yeah. This is a vision of the ends of the building and the vision of the side of the building. So we've elected to make the building a metal-sided building that will mimic, that's more cost-effective, but will mimic the Moose Visitor Center building, where it's kind of a brown wood look that the Moose Visitor Center has, with a rock facade on the base, so that it looks similar to that building. We'd also, by doing it this way, would have the ability to upgrade the camper registration building with new metal siding and a rock facade on the base to make both buildings within the North Park Campground match one another. This here, this building is the original camper registration building. And as you can see from the interior photos, the majority of all the walls have been removed. And the reason for that is that testing revealed that there was asbestos used in the construction of that building. And to bring it into compliance, we paid to remove, have a hazardous materials company come in and remove all the asbestos material within that building. So all the walls that basically divided the building up into different usable sections have been removed. And the cost was about $65,000 to do that asbestos mitigation. But it gives us a better look at the building. This building was built in a variety of sections, which made it difficult because all the sections do not meet current building code as far as tying it together structurally. So we are currently researching with engineers what it'll take to bring the interior structurally to code. Then we will have to redo the electrical system, which is also not to current code, and redo the plumbing, and then put the walls back in order to utilize it. The good thing about it is that we'll be able to consider making adjustments to how the building is utilized. So in the future, this building here would have a big area that was before. This back area was walk-in coolers and storage area. This will now be one large room that will be a combination of a registration area. It'll be a combination of a book and a nature store that people can buy stewardship materials or gifts and souvenirs. And then we propose to have a basically children's and family exhibit area for activities within this building. It'll house the laundry. The laundry typically would be housed in what we would call the camper services building. However, due to restrictions with sewer services, we have to divide up the water uses into a variety of different sewer systems, so we can avoid having to build a major sewer treatment facility. We have to divide it between different leach fields within the area to divide that water up. The back of the building would be an employee and volunteer host area, meeting space for our volunteers. And then it'll also still house a restroom facility for visitors to the park. The upstairs would be retained as a temporary employee housing area, with the changes being made to divide it up into a 4-bedroom instead of just a 2-bedroom, since prior it was used as a private residence for the owners of the KOA. For us, it'll be better served as a residential kind of dormitory where they have multiple bedrooms to house staff, which will help with our housing needs. So our goal is to maintain the camper registration building currently. We do not have funding in our current budget to pay for this facility to be either replaced or upgraded. So we'll be looking at doing a lot of the work in-house and augmenting it with other funds besides the $2.2 million that we dedicated to the campground. Ultimately, expenses right now are estimated to exceed $2.5 million. We agreed to provide at least $2.2 million to the project. And we currently have the initial $400,000 that was allocated to the project, plus an additional $2.1 million, bringing the total commitment right now up to $2.5 million for construction of the North Park Campground. I apologize, this slide's slightly blurry, but in the bottom section here is some of the big expenses on why it's costing so much. The camper services building, being commercial grade in a construction or remote area, we have difficulty. We have no local contractors that can manage this job and do the construction work. So the contractors have to come out of other neighboring cities. And to build it ADA compliant, that and the water system is included in that. That building is estimated to cost nearly $900,000. The electrical upgrades that are required to meet current usage and demands, because the campground was expanded over the years, is estimated to be just shy of $275,000. And the sewer system, which was only 2 of the 4 sewer systems that we need to place, was estimated at $465,000, bringing just this initial construction work to nearly $2 million. And as a reminder, we've already spent $200,000, so that puts us almost out of money. So we are looking at, and this process has taken a little longer because we've had to make choices on what we were going to provide initially. So initially, we will not do Loop A. We will focus on Loop B. the camper services building, and all the infrastructure that supports the full build out of the campground. And we're also taking some of the things out of the project in order to do those in-house, utilizing Colorado Parks and Wildlife, maintenance staff, heavy equipment operators, and mixing it with subcontracting out some of the technical plumbing and electrical work. So the camper services building and the electrical system has been bid and is ready to move forward. And that's the 900,000 and the nearly, well, the 575,000 roughly. And subsequent to that, it would be our intention to use remaining money and in-house staff in order to create the sewer systems to support that. And in the meantime, we'll also be working on a plan for the camper registration building and for Loop A to be phased in towards the end of that, probably after or a portion of it being after the 2022 deadline. But by 2022, we will spend at least 2.2 million, if not closer to the current allocated 2.5 million on upgrades to the campground. So today, and Abe can basically help us on telling me exactly what we need from you, but we need to try to get concurrence on whether you're okay with us moving forward with starting construction on the camper services building. The goal is that the contractors would like to get that building roughed in this fall and be able to do the interior work during the winter months. But we're running up against the end of the season up here for weather-wise. Beginning in September, we have risks of snow. By October, we have a high probability of snow, and you really can't do exterior work too reliably in November. So we only have a few months to try to get the camper services building up. So we would like to know if you're in concurrence with us to continue moving forward with this project, or if you have concerns and you would like us to slow down or stop progression. As I mentioned originally, there was several different managers available or involved in this process. Wade is with me today in the room.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Did you have any comments, Wade, that you wanted to add to?
Not currently. I think you covered that pretty well.
So with that said, I guess I'm going to open it up to questions from anybody that would that has any questions about the North Park campground and our proposed plan to meet the 2.2 million infrastructure improvement and visitor experience improvement project here that we're working on.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Commissioners? Commissioner Heath?
I asked this earlier, but just want to confirm, you feel reasonably certain that you will acquire the water right for that second well?
Thank you, Commissioner Heath. I appreciate the question. And yes, David Graff, our water resources engineer, has filed all the paperwork with Division of Water Resources. Division of Water Resources did some investigation and made some determinations, and they altered some of the paperwork and scope. But our understanding from Division of Water Resources is that they're in the process of issuing the permit for 1 acre-foot of water based on the original use dating prior to 1972, which provides for an exemption and basically utilization of an existing well that originally wasn't permitted. And so it is our anticipation, and Division of Water Resources have indicated that that permit is being drafted and should be in our hands soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Good.
All right. Other questions? Joe, I would just like did you, like 2 years ago, did you all envision the 2.2 could have gotten all of the master plan done, or, you know, is this sort of tracking as you expected?
The master plan, the way we designed it, had room for future expansion. So the Loop C, we never anticipated would be within the project scope, but it was something that we thought that down the road in the future, in maybe another 10 years, that the demand for additional full hookup campsites, which is what we're designing in the North Park Campground, is a full hookup, including water, sewer hookups, and electric hookups, that we would need additional camping units. So Loop C was a future design from the beginning. We did anticipate originally, or hope at least that originally, that we would be able to get both Loops A and B done. Construction prices have obviously gone up. And then also what we're finding is that it's been very difficult for us in a market that doesn't necessarily always favor a good price from construction, because there's a high demand for construction crews. The prices came in a little bit higher than we had hoped, and so we're having to take on a little bit more of the project ourselves. But like I said, we didn't anticipate Loop C. And Ranger Lakes, which was another thing that was in the lease as a goal to improve down the road, it was never our belief that we could do both North Park Campground and Ranger Lakes for $2.2 million. That was just the minimum amount that was requested. So we always anticipated that there would be additional needs in the future, that after we get this first phase done, that we would have to come back to over time and with future investments.
Okay. Commissioner Heath?
Right. And when we visited the area, Joe, there was a discussion about the concerns about security at Ranger Lakes. Has that been addressed?
I guess, can you remind me on the discussions of security you were saying?
Well, they described large numbers of people coming, and there not being adequate staff to really police the area into action.
I think that was North Sandhills, Joe.
Am I remembering the right place?
I think you're talking about North Sandhills.
I think you are.
Okay.
Okay.
State Forest State Park.
Yeah.
That's BLM land where we've got a piece interspersed. You're in the same part of the state, though.
Yeah.
So yeah, Commissioner Heath, the North Sand Hills, you're right, has had concerns with over utilization and a lack of consistent regulations. And so a small portion of the Sand Hills are on State Forest State Park. The majority is on Bureau of Land Management land. And then there's a portion that is leased by the BLM that is part of the State Land Board property. And so there's a management plan that is in progress with this Bureau of Land Management that is going to significantly change the setup and layout of the area and the accessibility of the different campgrounds, how close you can camp to the sand dunes themselves, and is working to make regulations that are similar between the different entities. And this year, we've had more enforcement presence at the North Sand Hills than we've had in any year prior to this, both mostly from the Bureau of Land Management, but also with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And that has helped, along with State Land Board assets that were put towards youth corps crews to help with fencing. And so I believe that area is improving, and the future master plan for that area that the BLM is working on, I think will also help with better enforcement and safety and resource protection for the North Sand Hills.
Thank you.
How is State Forest doing this summer, visitation usage?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So just like somebody mentioned earlier today about visitation throughout the state, we're seeing record numbers of visitors into the park. So of course the springtime was slow as some facilities were shut down, like the Moose Visitor Center was shut down during the initial stages of the coronavirus, along with all of our cabins being shut down, and the private concessionaire yurts and huts were shut down for nearly 2 to 3 months, depending on which facility. Since everything reopened, what we're seeing is increase in visitation, we believe, due to the fact that so many other opportunities like Little League Baseball, soccer, concerts, other things that people might be spending their time on, not being able to do that. And the governor has made it a big priority to make sure that the state parks were still available for visitors throughout the state to be able to get out and do something that gets exercise and helps with peace of mind. And so, like I mentioned, we are seeing record visitation. We're having at the Moose Visitor Center, typically a really big, weekend day might be 200 or 300 people through the Moose Visitor Center. And we're seeing those kinds of numbers on a weekday on a regular basis. And weekends, we're seeing like 500 to 600 people in the Moose Visitor Center, which would typically be what we would see on a special event or a holiday weekend. And we're seeing that every weekend. Right now, reservations for cabins are nearly non-existent, even on weekdays. Our campgrounds, just the other day, we were trying to do an operation in one of our campgrounds, and it was a Monday, and we were completely full, completely booked. And normally that particular campground is one of them that you used to be able to find a campsite on 4th of July weekend to visit it. And that's not the case this year. And so surely that is taxing the resources. It's taxing our staff on keeping up with it. But thankfully, due to staff that we do have, they're very dedicated, and volunteers, we put a lot of effort the last few years on increasing the number of volunteer sites that we have to allow hosts to come in and volunteer for the state park and provide a great service back. And so they're helping with the custodial tasks and keeping up with the trash and the cleaning of the restrooms. And as you can imagine, with coronavirus, we have to do a lot more sanitation work on a daily basis to decontaminate everything and make sure it's ready for the next guests. So it's been a challenge, but I think it's a great opportunity for the visitors to be able to use the parks. And our staff has been working hard to make sure they could keep up and provide that service for the visitors.
Yeah, great. And then my last question. I don't know how it works, but do you have to get back in line for additional capital dollars? Sort of, so there's a general cycle. It'll be a little bit before state forest gets dollars allocated for additional capital improvements.
Yeah, so that's another good question. Thank you. We actually, for this project, kind of in a matter of speaking, kind of cut in line for capital money as an agreement, because we agreed to meet this 2022 deadline. We basically got this initial 2.5 million allocated and moved some other projects throughout the state back in priority in order to make sure that this would be able to meet its deadline. And so to get another influx of money, there's not necessarily, it doesn't have to beat out other priorities. However, there are other priorities that took a back seat in order for this project to start. So to see another large influx of money, there probably would need to be a little bit of a gap. Additionally, North Michigan Reservoir has a 50-year-old dam that is in need of repairs, and it's currently estimated that project will cost between $5 and $7 million to complete. So between the two projects, you're talking between $5 and $10 million that will be invested into to the Colorado State Forest at State Forest State Park in the next 5 or so years here. And so the reality is there might be some push to hold off on another large allocation. With that said, part of the lease agreement was that $100,000 would be allocated to this park specifically for capital improvements every year under our small capital program, which that amount of money being earmarked specifically for the park is more than we would get on an average year through the small capital program. So teaming that with staff ability to do some in-house stuff, we are hoping that we can still move some of the capital projects forward through that process. Yeah. So it'll kind of be a mixture of things, I believe, going on.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions or comments? Are there any members of the public who wish to address this issue? If so, raise your hand, virtual hand. Seeing none, any other questions or comments from commissioners or staff? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
This is Commissioner Scanlon. I move that that we approve as presented the capital request for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife for the North Park Campground.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Scanlon, second by Commissioner Heath. Further discussion or comment? Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Abe. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you,
and Wade.
Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate your time. Thanks to the State Land Board staff for their help and moving this forward. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. Take care. All right. The next item, we're just going to plow through if everyone's okay. Okay. Policy review tower leasing site, tab 11. David Rodenberg. David, are you on mute? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Great. So good morning or good afternoon, commissioners. David Rodenberg, Tower Site Leasing Manager. This final action item is to recommend that the board approve modifications to the board's tower site leasing policy. So staff believes that these recommended policy modifications will create a policy that aligns better with the board's current leasing process and gives staff the flexibility to attract more clients and to increase tower site leasing on state trust lands. So a little bit of background, the tower site leasing policy was originally adopted in February 2017. This is the first review of that policy, and the recommended policy modifications are proposed at this time as part of the agency's normal policy review schedule and process. So all of the recommended modifications to this policy, except one, are to provide clarity to the policy and to align with other board policies. The one significant change to the policy that staff is recommending is to change the term allowed for a tower site lease from allowing staff to issue a lease with a 5-year terms, which is totaling 20 years, to allowing staff to administer up to a 30-year term. So tower site leases, as you know, encompass a small footprint, typically 2 to 5 acres, and generates significant revenue depending on the specific use. So the benefits to this term change is that it will allow staff to be more competitive in the market and attract more of these types of low impact and high revenue generating leases to our portfolio. As the board may recollect, back in December of 2019, they approved the extension of 4 tower site leases for an additional 30 years. So that's an example of what staff would be able to do without bringing these to the board for review. It seems to be a more common occurrence these days with tower sites. So that's it. Staff recommends that the board approve the proposed modifications and revisions to the tower site leasing policy as outlined in the cover sheet. And with that, if the board has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to help answer those.
All right, thanks, David. Any questions or comments? Are there any members of the public who wish to make comment? If so, raise your hand. I don't see any. I would entertain a motion.
Commissioner Carney, the board determines that it is in the best interest of the trust to approve the proposed revisions to the tower site leasing policy 600-003. The board delegates authority to the director to draft an order, take appropriate action consistent with the board's decision.
Thank you, Commissioner Carney. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Shaw. Further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
And Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0. We're staying with you, David, for item F, a renewable energy leasing policy.
Yes.
Tab 12. Tab 12.
Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Great. So again, good morning, commissioners. For the record, David Rodenberg, real estate section portfolio. This final action item is to recommend that the board approve modifications to the board's renewable energy leasing policy. So the board has had a lot of activity with our renewable energy program over the past few years, and staff believes that these recommended policy modifications will create a policy that aligns better with the board's current leasing process and will give staff the flexibility to attract more clients and to increase tower site leasing on state trust lands, as well as better manage our current portfolio. So a little bit of background, the renewable energy leasing policy was originally adopted in March of 2014. That policy was last reviewed in July of 2017. And the recommended policy modifications that we are proposing today is part of the agency's normal policy review schedule process. So I know that everyone has read the information in the board packet, but I'm going to go through a few key changes to the policy per policy section. So if you have Exhibit 2, the red line version of the cover sheet in front of you, it might make it easier to follow as I go through these changes. So in Section 1, staff added language to more clearly define and recognize the thorough review process that occurs, starting with reviews and feedback from our lines of business units, the district manager, and our stewardship trust manager. Language was also edited to clarify the statutory 118 rights that our agricultural lessees have, specifically related to the 1-year notice requirement. Staff gives the agricultural lessee the ability to respond in writing whether they are okay with the project moving forward via the planning lease or whether they object to the project. In addition, language was edited to clarify the requirements of the lessee to contact the appropriate local government entities and to obtain the required permitting for the project. Next, in section 2, this section was edited to remove repetitive language and to add language so that the management practices more clearly align with the board's leasing process again. It was also edited to require that the lessee contact any entity that staff determines to be appropriate for that specific project. And finally, for this section, language was edited to add flexibility for the frequency of staff inspections of the renewable energy leasing portfolio to follow the appropriate frequency as determined by the leasing process rather than stating the required frequency in the policy. This is consistent with other policies as well. So section 3, lease terms. For planning leases, staff edited language to allow a 1-year lease extension, which aligns with the current planning lease language. For production leases, staff edited the language to allow the length of the term to go beyond the term of the power purchase agreement. The power purchase agreement, known as the PPA, is the agreement between the renewable energy company and the utility. Since the capitalized cost of the equipment and or life of the equipment will often exceed the PPA, having a longer term in our leases makes it easier to get more favorable financing terms for the renewable energy company. So there are lease adjustment mechanisms in the lease that allow staff to adjust the rates during the term of the lease to ensure that the board continues to get market rates or higher during the term of the lease. Lastly, for this section, staff modified this section to simplify it by allowing staff the flexibility to have leases that are exclusive or non-exclusive to other renewable energy leases, planning or production, and or exclusive or non-exclusive to other surface uses. So a few more items in section 3 regarding lease terms, minimum pricing. In this section, staff clarified the minimum pricing for planning leases and increased the minimum rate. We also added language that is not in our current policy, stating that production lease rent is based off of rates from other leases in the project or market rates in the area. Finally, in the management portion of section 3, staff is recommending to add language that clarifies that for renewable energy projects that have objections from the agricultural lessee that lease the same land, the planning leases will be brought to the board for review and decision, which again aligns with the board's leasing process. So those are the major changes. There's a lot of other changes in that document. As you can see, it's a pretty red document, the red line version. But with that, staff recommends that the board approve the proposed modifications and revisions to the renewable energy leasing policy as outlined in the cover sheet. And with that, if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, David. Any questions or comments? Any members of the public wish to make comment? If so, raise your hand. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
After consideration, this is Commissioner Heath, after consideration of the materials presented and testimony given in our regular meeting today, August 12th, we determine as a board that it's the best interest of the trust to approve the proposed revisions to Renewable Energy Leasing Policy 300-003. We delegate authority to the director to draft an order and take appropriate action consistent with our board's decision.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Heath, second by Commissioner Carney. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Our next item is the August board leasing agenda, tab 13, and Alicia's, I see, been promoted. Congratulations.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, I'm Alicia Hawthorne. I'm presenting to you the August 2020 board leasing agenda. And so we have 9 items this month. We've got an amendment for a commercial lease. We have 4 competitive bids, all of which are agriculture leases. And we have 4 new leases. 1 is an agriculture lease, 2 recreation leases, and a right-of-way contract. And I know we've got some folks that are also promoted to answer any questions that the commissioners may have on this report.
Thank you, Alicia. Commissioners, any questions? I do have a question on the rec lease for, it's item 8. So maybe Justin Osborne or Abe. Just it's 17,000 acres. I had a, was this property or lease being considered, what's the interaction between this and sort of our desire to add to PAP? I don't know who to ask.
Waiting to hear from Justin.
Abe, you gonna take that?
Yeah, sorry, I had to jump back on here. So yeah, we've had over the last 10 years an existing, we've had either leases or temporary access permits with Frost Ranch for hunting, specifically hunting related purposes on that property, on their lease. And it was nominated as part of the PAP, or it was nominated by Parks and Wildlife. They did have an interest in this property for the PAP. However, in our discussions with Parks and Wildlife, the idea was that if a property had an existing lease on it, or had, had been used for recreation uses by a private party, then at that point they wouldn't necessarily be eligible for the PAP, wouldn't be eligible for the PAP. They had nominated most of the properties up and down that area for PAP when we first started this process. That's how that intersection there is. And
okay. So are we comfortable renewing this at this time, or? I mean, obviously you are comfortable because it's been recommended, so.
I think, Abe, I think you might talk more about what we agreed to do is renew it for the short term, and you've been working with them to develop a more robust recreation program that would result in a payment more commensurate with our other rec leases. Is that fair?
That is correct. It takes into account, first of all, I think it's been mentioned by a couple of folks in the area that the hunting quality in here is probably not equivalent to what you'd find up in Western Colorado, at least as far as opportunities. But with that in mind, knowing that, and with our history with the Frost Ranch and having their lease under a number of temporary access permits or hunting recreation leases, we've been working with them on a process, that would get us to a payment starting out at one point, but building a program that would get us a lease rate that is more commensurate with what we would expect or what we would derive from other sources in this area.
Okay, my intent here is not to beat on this, but I'm just questioning. I know that there's concern and question about adding property. If this is near Chico, right? And Hannah Ranch and all of that. Mm-hmm. And, I know at least Hannah and maybe some others were expressing concern about adding state land properties so close to urban populations into the PAP. Does this set up, does this help us? Does this create a situation where if we then try to enroll some of the other adjoining properties into the PAP and they object under the basis that you know, we've just recently made a rec lease to an adjacent property. I don't know how that plays out. If, you know, I just.
Well, I think that Abe touched on it, but I will reiterate. The difference is this had a rec lease on it before, albeit one that is priced below the market.
Okay.
We took that into consideration. The other lessees who have spoken with you have never held a recreation lease on their leased properties. And I think even this one, Abe did a really thoughtful analysis. It was questionable whether or not what they had paid us historically and the way they'd leased it, I suppose, met our objectives for rec leasing. You could argue it was just way too little for way too much land. But I think he developed a plan with them to incrementally get them to a place that we're comfortable with. So I do think they're distinctly different from others that might be brought to you.
Okay.
Abe, are you agree?
Yes, I agree. That's correct in how we came to that conclusion. The other part of it, you know, the public access program portion of it, we've mentioned this to this lease and the direction that we were going to recommend on taking with the Frost property to Parks and Wildlife, and they did not. They didn't object to it, or yeah, they understood where we were coming from on it.
Okay. All right. All right. Are there any other questions? Are there any members of the public who wish to make comment? If so, raise your hand. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the August board leasing agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved by Commissioner Shaw, second by
Second.
Commissioner Carney. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Commissioner.
Alicia. Thank you, Abe. Appreciate it. Next item, July 2020 board minutes. Any changes or additions that we need to call out? If not, we'll accept them by acclamation. Next item, election of board president and vice president. We don't really have traditionally a great process for for this.
You talk amongst yourselves.
Other than, you know, comments, I'm certainly happy to continue as president. I have 1 year remaining on my term, so I'm happy to do that. And I believe Commissioner Scanlon has indicated willingness to continue to serve as vice president. And so perhaps I'd offer that unless there is an alternative nomination or recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I move support by acclamation Gary Butterworth as chair and Christine Scanlon as vice chair for the coming term.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Ed, do we vote on this?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yes, you should go ahead and vote. Typically, in your normal meetings, it would just be all in favor, unless you were, unless there was actually a contested element, in which case you would try to do something to protect anonymity. But
yeah,
as presented here, I think you can just do your normal roll call vote, unless any of the commissioners would prefer to some sort of an anonymous procedure, in which case we can very quickly develop one.
Yeah. And do we vote? Do Christine and I vote?
Yes.
Of course.
All right. So it's been moved to for Gary Butterworth to serve a term as board president, Christine Scanlon as vice president. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath,
Aye.
Commissioner Carney,
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw,
Aye.
and I vote in favor. Continue the duty. Thank you all for your
Thank you.
confidence or avoiding
Thank
the
you.
responsibility. I'm not sure which one it is.
It is both.
Good. Item J, Permanent Fund Investment Board Representative. Commissioner Shaw has served as our representative, I believe, for just over a year or so. He has, as I do, just under a year left on our term, and I think we'd like to see perhaps one of our new folks step in that role as we know that we've got to flesh out. We're going to be sort of in this for the long haul, and I'd like to maybe one, appreciate John for serving in that capacity, but nominate Christine Scanlon as our representative to the Permanent Fund Investment Board.
I would second that.
Are there other any other comments to that?
So John, what time does the board meet? I just thought I'd ask.
6, Christine, it's 6 a.m.
6 a.m.
Perfect. I'm a ray of sunshine at 6 a.m. That's awesome.
Right before our meetings.
Yeah.
The next meeting is Monday at noon. Seriously.
It's good.
Monday the 17th at noon.
All right. Seeing no alternative, I'd take a vote to elect Christine Scanlon as our Permanent Fund Investment Board representative. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Heath?
Aye.
Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
And I vote in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Commissioner Shaw and Commissioner Scanlon.
Thank you.
Next item is staff report, tab 15. Bill, anything you would draw our attention to?
Commissioner, we're trying to use this also as the parking lot, as you and I have called it in years past, just to make sure we're following up on past things that you all have mentioned or voted on. And so to that end, you'll see a number of items in here. Wilson Mesa down in San Miguel County, you may see that we had been offering them an exclusive right to do due diligence and see if they wanted to buy it. They've declined to do that. They've sent us a formal letter declining that. And so Greg is going to work to interview some brokers and see if that is something we want to get on the market. I don't think we've, you all would need to make that as a formal decision, but I think we identified it as a high value, low income parcel. And we may want to create cash from that we can invest differently, particularly given what's happened with our revenue flow for the coming year and the fact that no money will be going to the permanent fund.
Yeah. We got the drought report, and Greg said that he'd be likely back to us next month with some items related to this. Is that accurate?
No, I'm sorry, related to COVID.
COVID. Oh, okay. All right.
Which we haven't really dealt with before. The drought work is as you allowed us. Staff is, I think there's probably been a half a dozen or so conversations so far with lessees, only a couple of adjustments, but as we said, we will report back to you whenever we've made an adjustment and what the financial value of that adjustment was. So you'll probably see a couple of those next month.
Okay. Any questions for Bill on the report or staff?
Commissioner Heath, next month we'll be presenting to you the responses for the Arista proposal. We did have 4 groups respond. And so we'll be analyzing those and making a recommendation to bring to you next month.
Great. All right.
Kristen, anything you'd wanted to add on the outreach activities? I know you had a lot of material in here this month. COVID isn't slowing Kristen down, I can assure you of that.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Kristen Kemp. Yeah, just to say, obviously our in-person outreach activities have come nearly to a screeching halt, but everything digital is still rolling along as planned. And hopefully you all saw our new website launched with very positive analytics for its first month. There was a lot of data in there. I doubt you have any questions, but if you do, I'm available. And same for our e-newsletter. Our quarterly e-newsletter continues to have strong open rates. And in terms of outreach, we're trying to do as much as we can virtually instead of in person.
Great.
I just have a question, Bill. Just
Sure.
I think you're in the office.
I am.
Have you all got a timeline or of any sort for still continuing to work at home? I only asked, my husband just walked in and I'm in his office and he'd like it back at some point. I'm like, we're almost done. I can relocate or
Commissioner Scanlon, Dan Gibbs,
I appreciate the challenge.
Dan Gibbs has set a policy for DNR to continue to work from home through January 1st. You may see an announcement of the governor's office that they are taking more incremental steps, but that's because they've got some other departments that need some more latitude. But Dan has said for DNR that this will remain the case through at least January 1.
At least the end of the year. Okay, I was curious where, yeah.
I think, and from a planning perspective, that means our meetings will remain virtual through that period as well.
For that time. No.
Nobody wanting to do large gatherings yet.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I'm kind of hearing a similar time frame. I was just curious about all that with you. It is fun to see everyone's backgrounds. Although I'm with Josie, I move throughout the house. I don't have my own office. So
nomad.
I am always on the move in the shared workspace that is my home.
My apologies for moving around. Raleigh has a WebEx starting a half hour after ours. His computer went down. I had to go find an iPad. So I appreciate your patience as I darted in and out.
I was going to have to move into my younger daughter's room where I get to sit on a beanbag if we were going to go.
Bill, on as far as the rest of our meetings this year, are we going to plan to just meet on the Wednesdays, take the full day effectively? Can we release the Thursdays?
Is that acceptable to all of you? I think it's unnatural to ask anyone to do a 2-day Zoom meeting. Yeah, I mean, if we really had a pressing matter, I would of course ask you, but I think we're able to manage our workload enough. If there were big voting items, we could compress a workshop, those sorts of things. So if it's working for all of you, why don't we plan on just doing the Wednesdays for September, October, November, December?
That'd be great.
Great.
And to that point, I just want to say congratulations again to staff. You do such an excellent job preparing us for this, not only in the written presentation, but also in the oral presentations you arrange. And it's very efficient and helps us really understand how complex the matters are. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I should note that we did staff training this month, and you were a part of it, with a third-party communications firm on sort of how do you maintain a presence in this virtual environment? How do you present more effectively? How do you communicate your message? And then, frankly, we all are practicing with the technology. As an organization, we move back and forth between Zoom and Google Meets, and so there are nuances to those things. And so we are maintaining our commitment to continuous improvement here. And I want to commend all of the team who's listening in for arranging those for us all and continuing those efforts. So, Commissioner Heath, I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I want to echo Josie's thanks. I'm in the meetings business. This is not easy to do as seamlessly as you all manage, particularly also with public comment and some of the complexities of how you have to present information and adhere to open meetings and that sort of thing. So you all do a remarkable job. I'm very impressed.
It's a great team here. Thank you.
I'm curious, and perhaps Kristen is the one to say, do very many people follow it now that we're online?
Hi, thanks. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Follow what?
Well, just in comparison to the in-person meetings, do you find that when we're virtual, follow the meeting?
And Nick can chime in as well, but we have found that more people are inclined to participate virtually and ask to make comments, probably because it's so much easier rather than having to, physically come to our boardrooms. But I will state that when, hopefully soon, the COVID quarantine passes, we have every intention of resuming in-person board meetings because they're more interactive and more engaging. So while the meetings have always, well, for the last couple years, folks from home can listen in, it is sort of an outlier right now for these few months to be able to participate virtually.
Good. Anything else? We're going to have a Callan report on the permanent fund, perhaps the treasurer, state treasurer, and an update from Best in September, right?
I invited, Callan has confirmed and Best has confirmed. I did not hear back from the treasurer, but I'll be on a call with him on Monday and I'll push him at that time.
And Chico continues, yes?
Yep, we will have a work session. I don't think we won't be asking you for a decision next month on anything, but we'll do the work session in prep for potentially in October decision item. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, great. All right. And thanks to Barb and Tracy and Kim for all the logistical support. Much appreciated. Anything else? There they are.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Stay well.
We got to adjourn.
All right. Yes, I will adjourn us.
Thanks.
Take care.